Welcome to our deep dive curated just for you. We've got some pretty wild sources today, covering everything from gut health to cancer research and brain mysteries and even some potential international intrigue.
It's amazing how these things all connect, isn't it?
No?
We're going to uncover some pretty surprising connections, I think, between health and technology and the environment.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's dive right in. Have you ever thought about like the connection between your gut and your brain?
Yeah, it might sound kind of strange, but more and more research is showing that the trillions of bacteria in your gut, like what we call the microbiome, play a really, really crucial role in your health,
Yeah.
affecting everything from your mood to your immune system.
So it's not just about digestion then.
No, not at all. There's a fascinating link between your gut health and your mental well-being. One of the sources you shared highlights a study about the potential impact of antidepressants, specifically SSRIs, on gut health. And it found a connection between prenatal exposure to SSRIs and an increased risk of functional constipation in children.
Wow. Yeah. That's definitely something to think about, especially for expectant mothers or people who are planning to be growing. It's a good reminder to discuss all the potential impacts of any medication with your doctor.
Absolutely. It's all about making informed decisions, right? And speaking of choices, let's talk about something we all encounter every day. Sugar, more specifically fructose, one of your sources. Children's Health Defense highlights a study that found consuming fructose can actually stimulate the growth of cancerous tumors, sometimes even doubling their growth rate.
Okay, well, that's a little unsettling, to say the least.
Yeah.
Makes you really think about how much fructose is in our everyday foods and drinks.
It really does raise questions about the hidden impacts of our diet. And on a related note, one of the sources you provided is a new book released in Germany titled Vaccinated Deceased, and it's dedicated to a pathologist who investigated potential organ damage related to mRNA vaccines.
Right. And we also have a document from the German parliament, the Bundestag, on the topic of vaccines. And obviously we know this is a sensitive issue, so we're not here to take sides. Our goal is simply to present the information from the sources and encourage you to do your own research from reputable sources.
Exactly. Critical thinking and careful evaluation of information are crucial, especially when it comes to your health.
For sure. And while we're on the topic of potentially controversial subjects, let's talk about genetically modified foods. One of your sources from GM Watch highlights a new study that found evidence of liver and kidney damage in rats that were fed GM soybean oil.
Yeah, this is a complex one, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you have concerns about the potential health risks, but on the other hand, there's a potential for GM foods to address global food security. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's a fascinating debate, and there are, valid arguments on both sides. I think the key is to stay informed and make choices that align with your own personal values and your understanding of the science. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And now shifting gears to a health issue that's pretty common. Eczema, one of your sources, suggests that living in a city or near a busy road might be impacting more than just your lung air pollution, specifically high levels of fine particulate matter, or
Yeah.
PM 2.5. Those tiny particles that can get deep into your lungs, they can also be affecting your skin.
Yeah, and it highlights the interconnectedness of our environment and our well-being. It really does. And speaking of the environment impacting health, there's a concerning situation unfolding in Oxfordshire, UK. An NHS-funded autism diagnostic service has been forced to close its list to new patients because of an overwhelming backlog.
Yeah, the wait list is over 2,000 people long, with estimated wait times extending to 2043. That's just heartbreaking. Really underscores the challenges facing healthcare systems around the world and the urgent need for increased resources and support.
Yeah, it's a sobering reminder of the long-term consequences of underfunding and the importance of advocating for those who need help navigating these complex systems.
Absolutely. Now, for a bit of hope,
Hmm.
let's look at how technology is being used to advance our understanding and treatment of diseases. Like Parkinson's researchers at Manchester Met have received funding to develop a digital twin brain, which is a virtual model that allows them to safely test medications and treatments.
Yeah, it's like having a virtual laboratory for the brain.
Right. What do you think the potential implications are for personalized medicine and targeted therapies?
Well, I mean, it's truly groundbreaking. Imagine being able to simulate the effects of different medications on your specific brain structure. It could revolutionize how we approach neurological conditions, not just Parkinson's, but potentially Alzheimer's, epilepsy, and even traumatic brain injuries.
It's not just about treatment either, right?
Yeah.
It could also accelerate research and lead to earlier diagnoses.
Exactly. And speaking of breakthroughs, another one of your sources highlights research into diabetic kidney disease, which is a leading cause of kidney failure worldwide. But scientists have identified potential therapeutic targets, paving the way for new gene therapies and drug treatments.
That's great. It's a beacon of hope for millions of people battling this debilitating condition.
Yeah.
It's a great example of how scientific advancements are constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible in healthcare.
Absolutely. Now let's dive into the fascinating world of neuroscience and the quest to understand intelligence. One of your sources highlights research being conducted in Würzburg, Germany, where a team is using machine learning to investigate the communication pathways in the brain and how they relate to intelligence.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. What have they found so far?
Well, their findings suggest that intelligence likely involves the whole brain, not just isolated regions as previously thought. It's a complex interplay of networks and connections that we're only just beginning to unravel.
It really challenges the traditional view of intelligence as being localized to specific parts of the brain, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
seems like we're just scratching the surface of understanding how the brain really works.
We are indeed. And speaking of pushing boundaries, another one of your sources discusses how researchers at the Technical University of Munich are using tumor organoids to study pancreatic cancer. These are essentially 3D mini tumors grown in the lab that mimic the characteristics of real pancreatic tumors.
So they're basically creating like miniature models of pancreatic cancer in the lab. How does that help researchers develop new treatments?
Well, it allows them to test existing and new treatments in a much more controlled and efficient way. They can screen thousands of drugs and drug combinations to see which ones are most effective at targeting and killing the cancer cells without harming healthy tissue.
It's like a fast track to finding effective therapies for this aggressive and often deadly disease.
Exactly. It's a remarkable example of how technology is revolutionizing medical research and giving us new tools to fight cancer. But let's not forget about the simple things we can do to improve our health, starting with breakfast.
Oh yeah, the most important meal of the day.
Yeah.
I have to admit I'm sometimes guilty of skipping it, but one of your sources highlighted a study that found that consuming 20 to 30% of your daily energy intake in the morning can have a really positive impact on cardiovascular health.
That's right. The study found that people who ate a substantial breakfast had lower BMI, reduced abdominal obesity, and improved cholesterol levels compared to those who ate a lighter breakfast or skipped it altogether.
So it's not just about eating something for breakfast. It's about making sure it's a substantial and nutritious meal.
Precisely. It's about setting yourself up for the day with the right fuel. And speaking of fueling our bodies, one of your sources brought up a really thought-provoking study from Tulane University about the long-term effects of diet.
Oh yes, the one about the mice and their offspring.
That's the one they found that mice fed a low-protein diet had offspring with lower birth weights and smaller kidneys for 4 generations.
Wow, 4 generations. That's incredible. It really highlights the concept of epigenetic inheritance, doesn't it? The idea that our lifestyle choices can impact the health of our children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren.
It's a powerful reminder that we're not just responsible for our own health, but for the health of future generations as well.
It really makes you think about the legacy we're leaving behind, doesn't it? The choices we make today can have ripple effects that extend far beyond our own lifetimes.
They certainly can. And while we're on the topic of responsibility, let's revisit the world of biofuels. Remember those concerns about fraud in the global used cooking oil supply chain?
Yes, the potential for mislabeling and basically adulteration of UCO to make a profit. It's worrying.
It is, especially considering Europe's heavy reliance on imports of UCO to meet its biofuel demand. This has created opportunities for fraudulent activities, and it raises questions about the effectiveness of current certification systems.
It sounds like there's a real lack of transparency and accountability in the industry.
That's a key concern, and it highlights the challenges of ensuring sustainability and ethical practices in a complex global market.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's address a sensitive topic that's been circulating, the Wuhan lab leak theory. One of your sources, a tweet from Yuri De Yin, mentioned leaked information about 3 Wuhan Institute of Virology employees being hospitalized with COVID-like symptoms in late 2019.
Right, and if this information is verified, it could potentially lend more weight to the lab leak theory. But it's important to emphasize that we're not here to endorse any particular theory or viewpoint. We're simply presenting information from the sources you provided and encouraging you to critically evaluate the evidence and form your own conclusions.
I think that's crucial, especially with such a complex and sensitive topic.
Absolutely. Now let's move on to a story about environmental activism and corporate accountability.
Okay, sounds intriguing. What's this one about?
One of your sources discusses a legal challenge that's been filed against the EU's approval of glyphosate, the key ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup herbicide.
Roundup, that's a very widely used weed killer, right?
Yes, it is. And that's why this legal challenge is so significant. Pesticide Action Network Europe, along with several other organizations, is claiming that there were serious flaws in the assessment of glyphosate's safety.
So they're essentially saying that the EU didn't adequately assess the potential risks of glyphosate before approving it for use.
That's the basis of their challenge, and it highlights the ongoing debate about the potential long-term health and environmental impacts of pesticides.
It's a complex issue with passionate voices on both sides.
It certainly is. And now, for something completely different, have you ever wondered if religious people are more generous than atheists?
Yeah, actually I have. I've always been curious about that.
Well, one of your sources, a study from Linköping University in Sweden, might have the answer. Their research suggests that religious people aren't necessarily more generous overall, but their generosity increases significantly when they know the recipient shares their religious beliefs.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about being religious or not, but about the social dynamics and shared identity within a group.
It seems that our sense of belonging and connection to others can play a significant role in shaping our altruistic behavior.
Welcome back to our deep dive.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much we've already covered, from the tiny world of the microbiome to these big global issues like biofuels and these legal challenges against big companies.
It's been quite a journey, and we're not stopping here. We've got a lot more to explore, especially in the realm of health and technology.
Okay, yeah, let's jump back in. Remember those digital twin brains we talked about?
Yeah.
The ones being developed at Manchester Met.
Yeah, those virtual models of the brain they're using to test medications and treatments for Parkinson's disease. It's a pretty fascinating concept, isn't it? And it has huge potential.
Yeah.
It could be a real game changer.
It sounds like science fiction being able to simulate the effects of different drugs on a virtual brain.
I know, right? But it's a reality, and it could revolutionize how we treat all kinds of neurological conditions. Not just Parkinson's, but Alzheimer's, epilepsy, even traumatic brain injuries.
Yeah, it's incredible to think about the possibilities for personalized medicine, like tailoring treatments to a person's unique brain structure.
Exactly. And the best part is it eliminates any risk to the patient. Researchers can experiment and, kind of play around in this virtual space, testing different drug combinations and treatment approaches with no real-world consequences.
It's like having a personalized simulator for your brain, allowing scientists to run all these experiments and simulations. That could lead to some pretty major breakthroughs.
Oh, it could really accelerate the pace of research and lead to more effective and targeted therapies. And while we're talking about breakthroughs, another one of your sources highlights the progress being made in understanding and treating diabetic kidney disease.
Right. That's the leading cause of kidney failure worldwide, isn't it?
Sadly, yes, but there's some good news. Researchers have identified some potential therapeutic targets for diabetic kidney disease, and this is opening up a whole new avenue for treatment possibilities.
So what does this mean for people living with DKD?
Hope. The identification of these therapeutic targets has paved the way for the development of new gene therapies and drug treatments that could prevent or even reverse the progression of this disease.
That's amazing. It's a good reminder that even with these seemingly huge, insurmountable health challenges, science is constantly searching for solutions and offering new possibilities.
It is. And speaking of challenging areas of research, another one of your sources discusses the work being done at the Technical University of Munich using tumor organoids to study pancreatic cancer.
You mentioned these before, right? The 3D mini tumors grown in the lab. Can you remind us how these organoids help with cancer research?
Sure. So basically, they're miniaturized versions of real pancreatic tumors. And this allows researchers to test different treatment approaches in a very controlled and efficient way. It's like having a miniature battlefield where scientists can test their weapons against cancer.
So they can test different drugs and see which ones are most effective at destroying the cancer cells.
Exactly. And they can do this without harming the patient,
Yeah.
which allows for really rapid experimentation and the development of more targeted and effective therapies.
That's incredible. It really shows the power of scientific innovation and how technology is transforming our ability to understand and treat these complex diseases.
It does. But, we can't forget about the simple things we can do to improve our health, starting with breakfast.
Ah, yes, breakfast. The fuel that gets us going. I'm definitely a breakfast person. What did the research say about breakfast and its impact on our health?
Well, one of your sources highlights a study that found that consuming, like 20 to 30% of your daily energy intake in the morning can have a big impact on your cardiovascular health.
So we're talking about a pretty big breakfast, not just a coffee and a pastry.
Right. A nutritious and filling breakfast. The study found that people who followed this approach had lower BMI, reduced abdominal obesity, and improved cholesterol levels compared to those who ate a lighter breakfast or skipped it.
Yeah, it makes sense. Starting your day with a good meal, sets you up for success both physically and mentally. It gives you energy, it stabilizes your blood sugar, and can even improve your mood and focus.
Absolutely. It's about giving your body the fuel it needs to thrive. And speaking of fueling our bodies, remember that study from Tulane University about how a low-protein diet in mice impacted their offspring for 4 generations?
Yes. That was mind-blowing. Like the fact that our lifestyle choices can have such a lasting impact, not just on us, but, on future generations.
Yeah, it's a concept called epigenetic inheritance, where our genes can actually be modified by environmental factors, including our diet, lifestyle, even stress levels.
So our actions today can literally change the genetic makeup of our children and grandchildren.
That's right. It's a powerful reminder that we're not just responsible for ourselves, but for the generations to come.
It makes you think about the legacy we're leaving behind, doesn't it? Like the choices we make today can have these ripple effects that go way beyond our own lifetimes.
They can. And while we're on the topic of responsibility, let's go back to the world of biofuels. Remember those concerns about fraud in the used cooking oil supply chain?
Yes, the potential for mislabeling and adulteration of UCO to make a profit.
Yeah, it's worrying.
It is, especially considering Europe's heavy reliance on imports of UCO to meet its biofuel demand. This reliance has created these opportunities for fraudulent activities, and it raises questions about how effective the current certification systems really are.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a real lack of transparency and accountability in the industry.
That's a huge concern, and it really highlights the challenges of making sure that things are sustainable and ethical, in this complex global market.
Absolutely. Now let's go back to the discussion about the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic and the Wuhan lab leak theory.
Yeah, it's important to remember that we're not trying to push any particular theory or viewpoint here. Our goal is to present information from your sources and encourage critical thinking. And one of those sources mentioned a leak of information about 3 Wuhan Institute of Virology employees being hospitalized with COVID-like symptoms in 2019.
Right. And this information, if it's true, could support the lab leak theory, but it's really important to be careful here and not jump to conclusions.
I think that's so important. We've seen how misinformation and speculation can just spread like wildfire, especially on social media.
Yeah, it can be really damaging. We need to be careful about the information we consume, especially when it comes to sensitive and potentially divisive topics like this.
It's about being respectful of different perspectives and evaluating evidence carefully and being open to changing our minds as new information comes out.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears to a topic that highlights the importance of corporate accountability. Remember that legal challenge against Monsanto's Roundup herbicide we discussed earlier?
Yes, the one filed by Pesticide Action Network, Europe, and those other organizations.
Right. Yeah.
Right. They're saying that the EU's safety assessment of glyphosate was flawed.
Exactly. And this case is a really good example of how citizens and organizations can hold corporations accountable, especially when it comes to protecting public health and the environment.
It's about demanding transparency and making sure that our regulations are strong enough to protect us. We shouldn't have to worry about whether the products we use are safe.
We shouldn't. And it's great to see people fighting for a healthy environment and holding these powerful companies accountable for their actions.
It's a reminder that we all have a voice and that we can make a difference. Now, for something a little different, remember that study from Linköping University about religious people and generosity?
Well, yes, the one that found that they were much more generous when they knew that the recipients shared their faith.
Yeah. It makes you think about what influences our behavior. It seems like our sense of belonging and shared identity can play a big role in how we treat others.
It's really interesting, isn't it? It makes you wonder about the role of empathy and connection in all of this. Do we only act altruistically when we feel a sense of kinship with the recipient?
That's a good question to think about. It seems like our deep dive has taken us on quite a ride, hasn't it? From worry and outrage to hope and inspiration. We've covered a lot.
We have, but there's still more to uncover. Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore even more fascinating insights.
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive. We've covered so much ground, haven't we? From like the tiny world of gut bacteria to these global questions of biofuels and corporate accountability.
Yeah, it really shows how everything's connected, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I keep thinking back to that study with the mice and how their diet, affected their offspring for 4 generations.
It's pretty mind-blowing, isn't it? Like, we really have to think about how our lifestyle choices, impact future generations.
And speaking of those choices and their consequences, Let's go back to biofuels for a minute. We were talking about the potential for fraud in the used cooking oil supply chain.
Yeah, the push for sustainable fuels is a good thing, but it opens up these opportunities for people to take advantage.
So we can't just assume that because something's labeled as sustainable that it actually is.
Right, exactly. We need to be informed and really demand more transparency from companies and regulators.
Now let's touch on that topic that's been in the news a lot, the origins of COVID-19. We talked about the Wuhan lab leak theory, and that leaked information about those 3 employees who were hospitalized.
Yeah, it's important to say again that we're not supporting any particular theory here. We just want to present the information and encourage you to think critically about it.
Exactly. And with so much information and misinformation flying around these days, it's more important than ever to really evaluate the evidence.
Absolutely. We have to be careful about what we believe and be open to different perspectives.
Speaking of evidence, let's circle back to that legal challenge against Monsanto and Roundup.
Oh, yeah. The groups involved are saying that the EU didn't do a good enough job of assessing the safety of glyphosate.
So this case could have big implications for pesticide use and the role of regulators.
For sure, it's a reminder that we need to hold corporations accountable and push for policies that protect us.
Now, for one last interesting tidbit, remember that study about generosity in religion?
The one that said religious people were more generous if they knew the recipient was the same religion?
Yeah. It really got me thinking about why we do the things we do. It seems like our sense of belonging and shared identity plays a big part.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much do empathy and social connections influence our behavior?
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive. We've explored so much from tiny bacteria to global issues. It's been quite a journey.
I hope we've made you curious and maybe challenged some of your ideas and that you'll keep exploring these things.
That's what it's all about, right? Learning, questioning, and exploring the world around us.
Well said. So keep learning and keep diving deep into the world of information.
Thanks for joining us.